The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it.
Hello, this is Dane Wigington with the weekly installment of Global Alert News for August 13th, 2016. The show is broadcast on KQMS Saturday morning, 6 to 7 a.m. Recordings of the show can be found at GeoEngineeringWatch.org under the radio section for those that don't want to wake up at 6 a.m. on Saturday morning. Last week's show, I apologize, did not get posted, and for some reason the station was unable to record that show and post it as they normally do on the KQMS site. My apologies for that. The show was, however, filmed, and a YouTube of that show will be put up because I interviewed former CIA officer Kevin Shipp in the KQMS studios, and we did film that. We just have not been able to get that posted yet, but that will be coming. So onward with this week's show. And for those live listeners in Northern California that don't know what GeoEngineeringWatch.org is, it's the largest website and the most visited website in the world on the subject of geoengineering. And GeoEngineeringWatch.org doesn't sell anything. We are non-political. We simply want to be used as a resource for people to understand that they are part of a grand and lethal experiment on planet Earth with ongoing climate engineering operations that are, mathematically speaking, the greatest and most immediate threat to life on Earth short of nuclear cataclysm. It's a mathematical fact. Stories in this issue: tour of dead and dying trees in Northern California. And about 70 million are the estimated amount of trees that are dead and dying, but the number is actually much, much larger than that. I'll get to that story later on in this issue. Other stories: Obama, the global weapons of mass destruction dealer. That many are trying to ignore that fact. Vaccination safety lies. An update on the Northern California Vaxxed event that was very well attended and completely blacked out by the media. No surprise. The power structures push toward World War III and much more. How many people do each of us know who really want to get at the truth? How many do we know that are not afraid to face reality? And how many people do each of us know that really want to remain in total denial, even as the world implodes around us all? Denial is the theme of the day on planet Earth and in the circles of academia, and especially in the ranks of the U.S. population. Something to consider: denial does not deliver us from the dilemmas that we loathe. Only in fully facing our fears can we have any chance of prevailing. Think about that. All the power structure has to do is keep the stock market facade going, and the majority of the U.S. population is all too willing to ignore the world dying around them, literally dying around them. And this is, again, a mathematical fact. For those people who want to adamantly deny how bad it is out there and how dire the environmental implosion is, that's simply a way to avoid facing reality, because it's a statistical fact that we are in the sixth great mass extinction now. Species extinction rate is likely approaching 300 a day of plant, animal, and insect going extinct. The oceans are dying, the forests are dying, the overall percentage of wildlife that's been lost in the last 40 years, nearly 60% of Earth's wildlife population is lost in the last 40 years. How many people think that can keep going? Now, in the meantime, World War III is looming on the immediate horizon, being pushed by our own government that has run out of options. The U.S. election facade continues to distract Americans who are, in general, all too willing to be distracted from real issues. And what's our choice of candidates? A clown and a criminal. And that's apparently the best we can do, because that's the choices the power structure has given us. Now, the medical industrial complex also continues to wreak havoc on the population as a whole. Here's a quote from Benjamin Rush. Unless we put medical freedom into the Constitution, the time will come when medicine will organize into an undercover dictatorship to restrict the art of healing to one class of men and to deny equal privileges to others. The Constitution of the Republic should make a special privilege for medical freedom as well as religious freedom. Now, that quote is not new, but how applicable is it to what's happening today when we are being forced to vaccinate our children, soon to be forced to vaccinate adults as well, with vaccinations that are proven to be unsafe, and with a top-level CDC scientist testifying on the record that the CDC has been systematically hiding vaccination dangers for decades. How safe are vaccines, and what isn't the public being told? And this connects into every other issue, by the way. Many people think I'm diverting from the climate engineering issue, and that's not the case at all. I'm simply saying all this is connected. And in fact, the metals, the toxic heavy metals in vaccinations, are synergistically toxic with what's raining down in the air column from the climate engineering programs. Is that an accident? And should not both issues be addressed then? So, in regard to vaccination safety and what we're not being told, health authorities and the media relentlessly repeat the mantra that vaccinations are unequivocally safe. And many uninformed consumers cling to this mantra like a lifeboat. More often than not, consumers know little or nothing about the vaccination safety testing process and assume that vaccination manufacturers and regulatory institutions have exercised due diligence in ensuring that vaccines are as safe as possible. This is not the case. Not the case. The testing that vaccination manufacturers have to undergo is completely different than pharmaceutical drugs. And from a report, this statement: investigators compare a group that receives a drug with another group that receives a harmless placebo. That's the case with pharmaceuticals. But as I stated, not so with vaccination clinical trials, many of which use placebos that contain an aluminum additive. Now, how do you compare two substances that are both toxic so that the substance that you're going to inject in people doesn't show up any different than the placebo that's not a placebo that's also toxic? So if there's no difference between the two because they're both toxic, how can that not completely skew the test? It does, and that's how vaccinations are tested. This is criminal. So what are the implications of using an aluminum-based placebo that's not innocuous or inert, but instead intrinsically capable of stimulating pathological, immune, and neuroinflammatory responses? A completely skewed trial, and that's how vaccinations are tested. I want to announce that at the JCPenney store in Reading at the Shasta Mall at 1 p.m., for those who want to help learn about the vaccination issue and the new data that's out in the Vaxxed film that our medical community, for the most part, is ignoring, and unfortunately a great many parents are ignoring because they don't really want to face this truth. I think a number of activists are going to be at the JCPenney Mall where there's a child vaccination program going on at 1 p.m. to try to share some real data with those that are showing up without knowing what they're injecting into their children's veins. So many in our society pretend to protect our children when, in fact, they're enforcing the mandatory poisoning of our children from the day they're born. Mandatory vaccinations, and I said the hepatitis vaccination, which is given the moment your child is born. Now, why would that be for an immune system that's not yet developed and with a vaccination that contains known toxic heavy metals, and to vaccinate against an issue that your child would not be exposed to unless they're having sex or doing drugs with a needle? Why would it be necessary to inject them on day one? Something the medical industry should answer. And again, as I stated, the completely tyrannical media, total blackout of the Northern California Vaxxed climate engineering / CIA confession of government criminality event. Complete blackout by the Record Searchlight and KRCR and A News Cafe, our three local main media sources, all three of which got multiple press releases and all three of which completely blacked out the very well attended event that had groundbreaking documentary Vaxxed film screened twice, had testimonies from former CIA officer Kevin Shipp discussing the vaccination issue, climate engineering, and the general tyranny within the ranks of our government and what they do to whistleblowers, and our local media completely blacked out this event. Is that not criminal? Because all three of these news sources, Record Searchlight, KRCR, and A News Cafe, all know not to bite the hand that feeds them. It's not about morality. It's not about informing the population. It's not about exposing the dangers to our children. It's about revenue. That's what it's about. All roads lead back to the money, don't they? Now, some courageous medical professionals came to the event and left shocked. But sadly, the vast majority of the extremely extensive Shasta County medical community turned two blind eyes to the must-see data in the Vaxxed documentary, which includes on-the-record confession, as I stated earlier, of a top-level CDC scientist with almost 10,000 documents that prove that the CDC has been systematically hiding proven vaccination dangers. Congress will not let this scientist testify and present his data. Why not? Because Congress is just as bought and sold as the medical industrial complex, and as is the vast majority of the medical community. Unfortunate, but true. The medical community that's being paid large bonuses for administering the full cycle of vaccinations to our children. And they don't want continuing education. They don't want to learn what they don't know because they don't want to face the fact that they've been contributing, unfortunately, to a major health impact of our children, the autism skyrocketing epidemic. How total can the hypocrisy of the medical community go? How total can it be? What happened to the oath of do no harm? Where's the virtue in our society? And how can any parent truly claim to care for their children and not, at minimum, take the time to examine the Vaxxed film? And this incredibly important documentary can now be viewed online. I believe the fee is $3.99. Aren't our children worth $3.99? There's absolutely no excuse for any medical professional or any parent not to view this film and consider the shocking confession of this top CDC scientist along with all the other data that's presented in the film. Go online to Vaxxed and view the film if you truly care about your children, period. On the bigger picture front, a lot to cover in this show, and I'm not sure I'm going to get through it all, but let's try. How's the biosphere doing? I ask that question a lot, and it's getting worse every week, and the denial continues. First, many are unfortunately under the false impression that because they're not seeing the blatant horizon-to-horizon particulate trails. This is related to climate engineering, for those that are unfamiliar with this subject. Climate engineering, geoengineering, solar radiation management, stratospheric aerosol injection, all these scientific titles for what governments around the globe are doing in our skies. The grand and lethal experiment of which we are all a part without our knowledge or consent. But many who know about climate engineering and who relate this to the long, blatant horizon-to-horizon trails, which have not been prevalent in many areas, especially over the U.S. West, in the last 6 to 8 weeks. Many people falsely assume that there's no spraying going on above them. And in almost all cases, this is not true. The silvery white skies, especially at sunrise and sunset, are a harbinger of what's still going on above our heads. And again, in Northern California, this is especially true, where the ridiculously resilient ridge has again taken root. And this spray light, if you will, the silvery white skies, accompany unimaginably intense UV radiation as the geoengineers build high-pressure heat domes to help steer the jet stream where they want it, and having no regard for the life forms that are frying underneath this heat dome. And how do we know that these short, bright trails that we still see where people mistakenly think that the spraying has stopped, how do we know that these are spray dispersions and not condensation? First, let's start with this. When the tankers go over and they're still visible for any that spend enough time outside, Many of these tankers have misaligned nozzles that do not disperse in exactly parallel lines from the jet engines. Now, are we to believe that the engines are not mounted correctly? That they're mounted in a crooked fashion on the jet? Of course not. And when we have a plume on one side or another of a 4-engine aircraft that shoots out to the side, of course that's not condensation, or it would be aligned directly with the other engines. Also, we have film footage of these shorter trails being turned on and off, up-close film footage. You can't turn condensation on and off. We have photographs of the nozzles visible on these aircraft. We have mountains of data. So please consider the fact that there is what appears to be an effort to be more covert with the aerosol spraying operations, but it is still going on, period. Now, on that note, everything that is sprayed at altitude goes into our breathable air column. So how bad is our air? Here's a headline. Southern California hit with worst smog in 3 years as hot, stagnant weather brings surge in hospital visits. Now, I have another shocking headline that elaborates on this from South Africa. I'll get to in a moment. Actually, it's a communication from a contact in South Africa. But what's called smog is also including climate engineering particulates, and people ask, why isn't this showing up? Why wouldn't the air quality testing show up or reveal the particulates from climate engineering? Because these particulates are exponentially smaller than anything that air quality tests for by design. The system is designed not to show the climate engineering fallout, and certainly no mainstream source will reflect on the fact that these massive high-pressure domes are a result, in so many cases, if not all cases, of climate engineering radio frequency transmissions that microwave the atmosphere. What do people think will happen when you microwave the atmosphere that's full of particulates, heavy metal particulates, that the friction between those and the movement and the heat that's created from microwaving these particulates must create heat, and it does. So while the geoengineers are trying to cool one section of the country or the planet, they're superheating other sections, causing a worse overall global warming. And that's a statistical fact as well. So, from this headline about the worst smog in years in Southern California, quote, Southern California's experienced its worst smog in years, despite the fact that we're continually told our air is getting better, aren't we? It couldn't be further from the truth. As heat and stagnant weather increase, the number of bad air days and ozone pollution levels are exceeding anything seen in recent years. One more line from this report. Where the pollution is worst in the Inland Empire, where I grew up, by the way, hospitals and asthma clinics are reporting dramatic increases in patients seeking treatment for respiratory illness. Their breathing difficulties exacerbated by the persistent heat and pollution. Now, how can this not happen when you have tanker aircraft dumping tens of thousands of tons each over populations? We have the world's most recognized geoengineer, David Key, stating on the record that the goal of dumping 20 million tons of aluminum nanoparticulates into the atmosphere annually to try to deflect some of the sun's incoming thermal radiation, with no regard for the consequences, apparently. Totally shredded ozone layer. The UV radiation is frying the entire planet because of geoengineering, destroying the ozone layer. And the fact that all those particulates rain down onto the planet where they contaminate the entire web of life. This data is all available, by the way, for anyone who chooses to investigate, just like the data on the vaccination dangers is available for any who are not afraid to face the truth. Now, just this morning, I got a message from a contact in South Africa. Here's the message, and I quote, "Hi, Dane. We're in some final stages here in South Africa. I have so many family members in hospitals and dead from lung and sinus issues. It is now off the charts. We live with a mother-in-law who just had what they think is seizures and stroke and serious lung infections, and everyone I know over the whole country is suffering. Similarly, one uncle just died after coughing a lot for a while. Another in a hospital with pneumonia. All my family all over the country are sick. I know someone who has contact with the CAA, the Civil Aviation Authority, who said he inspects these aircraft which are spraying us, trying desperately to find out who they are." End of message. This is a credible contact in South Africa. And South Africa has been pounded for decades. Thus, all the U.S. boots on the ground on every country in South Africa that's been droughted out into oblivion, forced to their knees, and then forced to allow U.S. occupation. This is business as usual. That's why there's U.S. boots on the ground in 156 countries around the globe. And anybody who says the U.S. is not an empire, you simply need to look the word up and understand what empire means. And to our military brothers and sisters, as I have so many times in the past, I salute your motives for signing up with the military, but I ask you to consider reality, that you are simply signing up to serve a tyrannical power structure that doesn't give a damn about the U.S. population. Consider that. It's not enough to have a good motive. You have to look at the facts and consider what you're participating in. And I'm begging you to do that. And I've given to DAV for 20 years, Disabled American Veterans, and VFW, Veterans of Foreign Wars. I worked with rehabbing NAM vets. And my heart bleeds for our military brothers and sisters who have been injured, and certainly their families of those who have been killed. But are we not part of the problem if we don't consider what we're participating in? That we are facilitating. Our military has become nothing more than a paid mercenary unit for those in power. Consider that. Now, for those in power who try to feed us the lies that many people want to believe because the denial is so incredibly prevalent, so much of the population just wants to be told a lie so that they can feel good about what they're doing and what they're participating in. And here's a headline to drive that point home. Quote, this is the headline: "Oil spills are actually good for birds, fish, and the economy, according to the oil industry." Here's an excerpt from this report. For the past few weeks, the Washington State Energy Facility site, that's EFSEC, has been holding hearings on the matter of a proposed oil-by-rail terminal that could be built in Vancouver, Washington. If approved, it would be the largest oil-by-rail facility in the country, handling some 360,000 barrels of crude oil shipped by train every single day. It would also greatly increase the number of oil trains that pass through Washington, adding a total of 155 trains per week to the state's railroads. Now, even though environmentalists worry that the increase in oil trains could lead to a rise in oil train derailments, for those in Shasta County, let's remember the train derailment that completely killed the Sacramento River some 25 years ago. How good was that for the environment? That's considered by many to be the greatest inland environmental disaster in the U.S. still to date. So, although those who care about the environment worry about this extra fuel transport, what's the oil industry say? Here's a quote from them. "When a spill occurs, new economic activity occurs to clean up contaminated areas and remediate affected properties and supply equipment for cleanup activities." What an incredibly insane perspective that is. That creating economic disasters is good for the economy. That's the Orwellian world we live in. When there's no environment, there is no economy, there is no civilization, and we're heading to the point where there is no life on Earth because of this exact type of programmed mindset that's completely and totally irrational. And we have the same fossil fuel funded think tank telling us that the Santa Barbara oil spill was great because it created some 700 temporary jobs to help with cleanup. And the BP oil spill was, it seems, a favor for us all because it created 25,000 jobs. And for those who think that the military, industrial, fossil fuel, medical complex, it's all part and parcel of the same power structure, would tell us just how badly the climate system is damaged, just how badly the biosphere is damaged. Think again, because their task is to hide that at all costs, to keep business as usual at all costs. And on that note, exactly how badly damaged is the biosphere? And if we look at refugees globally, we now have recent statistics that show that 65 million refugees are currently trying to find some place to live and to survive. And we're told that these refugees are related to simply global conflict. But what's underlying that conflict? And again, we find biosphere implosion, the search for remaining resources, which are the cause of these conflicts. It's all about power, control, and trying to acquire Earth's remaining resources. It's about using the environment as a weapon. That's what climate engineering does. Climate engineering is weather warfare, period. And for all those academicians that are still trying to pretend that they're researching some sort of potential mitigation for global warming because they're researching climate engineering, you're part of the problem. And for those who recognize global warming but refuse to acknowledge climate engineering is real and ongoing, you're also part of the problem. Denial, deception, willful ignorance, all part of the problem. The same is true in the vaccination issue. We have a society that wants to be willfully ignorant. We have academic circles that want to be willfully ignorant because that helps provide their paychecks and pensions. How do you get an academician to admit to something when his paycheck and pension depends on him not admitting to it, not recognizing it, not seeing it? Here's a headline from National Geographic. This is brand new. This will be out in September issue of National Geographic. Our oceans are dying, by the way. I've spoken about that again and again and again. This is a brand new NGO article. Quote, "The blob that cooked the Pacific." That's the title. They're talking about the heat zone in the Pacific that is killing that part of the ocean, which is also directly related to the heat domes, which I just mentioned earlier in this show, the ridiculously resilient ridge that has been set up again and again and again over the U.S. West Coast for goals that the climate engineers have with steering the jet stream. The high-pressure domes spin clockwise, and that spins the jet stream up and over the west, blocking moisture and frying the west under that heat dome. It's also frying the ocean. You can't interfere with the natural systems and get a good result, and there's nothing benevolent about climate engineering anyway. We all need to understand that. And whatever other issues we face, and all the issues that so many special interest groups are focusing on, won't mean anything in the very near future if climate engineering continues to decimate what's left of our planet's life support systems. So all the activities that people are working on, all their own interests and projects in the political realm, in the environmental realm, won't matter if we don't deal with climate engineering. And it even supersedes events like Fukushima. And Fukushima is a cataclysm of unknown proportions still. It's unfolding. There's no end in sight. There's no technology to fix it. But I would argue, and have argued again and again, climate engineering is destroying what's left of our life support systems right now, and this is most important, is diminishing all of our cognitive ability, because we are all inhaling with every single breath highly toxic metal and chemical particulates that are affecting our ability to think clearly, our cognitive function. If we can't think clearly, how can we face Fukushima or anything else? And if our environment's being systematically destroyed by climate engineering, which is being sold as an attempt to mitigate a runaway climate event, which, by the way, we are in right now. I think statistically that's inarguable at this point. We're in a runaway greenhouse effect right now, and climate engineering is helping to fuel that fire. In the attempt to hide it, just like BP did in the Gulf of Mexico by using the chemical Corexit that made the BP spill 52 times more toxic, according to environmental impact reports. But they used it anyway because it helped to hide the problem. Same mentality with climate engineering. If we don't face climate engineering, everything else is a moot point. If we don't expose it and stop it, and we need the public to get up off the bench and stop cheering from the sidelines, those who even know this is going on, a lot of cheering from the sidelines is going on. That won't help us get the job done. We need people to actually move the ball forward, share credible data with everyone who should see it. This includes article authors, media sources, agency officials, elected officials. The list is long and endless. We need people to actually help move that ball forward. So from National Geographic, and there's people at National Geographic that know climate engineering is going on as well. As I've stated in previous shows, I was contacted by an NGO reporter who knew climate engineering was going on, who wanted to somehow weave it into an article. I had 3-hour-long conversations with this individual. And he was going to come here to interview me on the tree die-off here that's happening, because I have a habitat reserve next to Lake Shasta. I've done 6 cost-share programs for habitat restoration, and our forest is dying by the day. And he wanted to document that and weave in the climate engineering issue and the metal contamination, and he just disappeared off the radar, as has a BBC reporter who contacted me and a New York Times reporter. Same thing. So whenever a fire starts to burn in an arena that could actually bring this issue to light, that fire is somehow stomped out. Is that a coincidence? I think not. So back to the NGO article and the extremely warm zone of water off the U.S. West Coast. And I encourage people to read this article, too. It's called The Blob That Cooked the Pacific Again. And the headline says, when a deadly patch of warm water shocked the West Coast, some feared it was a preview of our future oceans. So what does NGO try to do, as so many other agencies? They try to paint this picture that this is just some natural consequence that we should all just accept. And that's not the case. The planet's warming from a great many causes, and I know there's many who don't want to accept that. I get a lot of comments from people who have convinced themselves that there's nothing wrong with the planet, nothing wrong with the climate, nothing wrong with human activity that cuts down the forest, paves the planet, poisons the oceans, and puts 100 million tons of CO2 in the atmosphere every day. There's nothing wrong with all that. That the only thing wrong is climate engineering. And that's total denial as well. Because the planet doesn't know where the particulate came from that's affecting the atmosphere, whether it's a smokestack or the back of a jet aircraft, it doesn't know. All forms of human activity that affect the biosphere and Earth's energy balance are forms of geoengineering, period. And those who have bought the unimaginably ludicrous lie that humans couldn't possibly affect the climate, how ridiculous is that? The Earth had an incredibly balanced climate system that took millions and millions of years to reach that equilibrium. How in the world could what we've done to the planet not affect that? I can't imagine anybody coming to such a conclusion. So how hot will it get? If we stay on this course, and I've said this again and again and again, and many people don't like to hear this because they want to hear just do A, B, and C, and everything will magically fix itself. That's not reality. I can't say it. I won't say it. I don't care how rejected the truth is. I can't not state the truth as the data dictates. I can't not do that. I won't do anything but that. Current study says this. Here's a headline to consider. Think about this. Truly consider the headline I'm about to read. This is from an Arctic news site. Headline quote, 10 degrees C temperature increase by 2026 predicted. Now, if we stay on this course and that happens, what does that mean for all of us? It means that we're gone. We're long gone, all of us. No complex life form can survive that much temperature increase. And that's the course we're on in the next decade. And current data indicates we are already past 3.5 degrees C right now, because we know they're falsifying temperature readings around the country and we believe around the globe. Radically falsifying. It means it's much hotter than we're being told already. And humans have not existed on the planet over 3.5 degrees C baseline temperature rise from pre-industrial times. And we are already past that. So the climate science community that is betrayed populations, unimaginably betrayed, because even if your paycheck and pension depends on you lying, that doesn't mean it's okay if you lie. If you don't or can't say anything for fear of repercussion, then don't say anything, but don't lie. Don't lie. And if all the academicians came out of the shadows together, we could get this issue out in the open and have some chance of salvaging something from our planet. So we have another headline. Is California entering a mega drought? Now we're not entering anything, we're already there. Statistics show that this drought is at least the worst that has happened in 1,200 years. Is that not a mega drought? But we have the media and academia, again, doing what they're paid to do, trying to convince us that this is somehow some sort of natural phenomenon. It's anything but. It must rain more on a warming planet. The laws of physics dictate this. I've said this over and over. How can we have so much protracted drought around the globe? Because we have an atmosphere filled with desiccant, toxic particulates that are part of the climate engineering programs. From this report about the California megadrought, California storms and droughts are getting more extreme according to new research from Stanford. Stanford is absolutely on the power structure payroll, period. Who's one of their main academicians that toes the line for the power structure? None other than Ken Caldera. Look him up. Geoengineer Ken Caldera from Stanford and let him know what you think, because he is the epitome of tyrannical cowards that work in the science community that's cited by all these mainstream science sources. This man is the epitome of what's wrong with the human race, literally. So, according to new research from Stanford examining recent rainfall patterns, the result is a new normal. Again, trying to convince us that this is something normal or natural, with fewer average years and more dry times, and also more wet times. We haven't really seen much of that, have we? Other forecasters warn that California might be entering an extended period of drought known as a megadrought. Uncertainty about changing rainfall is a challenge for the state's water system built on the predictable arrival of snow and rain. And as with the academicians, the, quote, forecasters are nothing more than paid liars at this point. That's exactly what they are. And these are some of the groups of people that it's up to all of us, not just a few of us, but all of us, to find the contacts for and to send them credible data and CC as many people as you can, as many credible people as you can with such a communication, so that the person you're communicating with, whether it's a forecaster, an author of an article, or an elected official, so that they know many people are witnessing that conversation, to hold them accountable. We have to do this, just as I did with Marcia McNutt, the president of the National Academy of Sciences. So let's consider, with this drought that's hitting California, let's remember this fact that I've cited in previous shows as well. Let's remember and consider that every single Middle Eastern country that's been toppled by the Western power structure was first subjected to record-shattering droughts. The ongoing NATO climate modification programs and the droughts they create were even acknowledged on the floor of the UN by some of the countries being victimized by the weather warfare insanity. Iran is one. Look it up. They have military systems like ours. They have radar. They know what's going on in their airspace, and they have stated on the floor of the UN their country was being droughted out by NATO weather modification programs. Same thing happening in Africa with the communication I read earlier from my contact in Africa. This is completely out of control. Completely out of control. The train is totally off the rails. And if we don't deal with it, we'll very soon have nothing left to salvage. Another headline, and this relates to the ridiculously resilient ridge over California. Here's the headline. In Russia's warmest summer ever. Again, for all the people that still want to rant global cooling and who have accepted the narrative fed to them by the power structure and the military-industrial fossil fuel complex, why would you accept such a narrative? I don't like Al Gore either. I recognize carbon credits are a sham, but that doesn't mean I'm going to adhere to some sort of propaganda lie when I can look around me and see the planet's in total meltdown, with climate engineering making it worse, not better. So the headline again, in Russia's warmest summer ever, Arctic ice reaches record low. Now consider this, the military-industrial complex wants desperately to hide this fact. And they're chemically ice nucleating all over the Arctic. We have satellite imagery to prove this. We have the patents to prove this process exists. We have record warm Arctic oceans, record shattering warmth in the Arctic Ocean. So what's keeping this ice together? Because they're statistically hiding the fact that it's imploding also. As I've stated in previous shows, they now consider any area of ocean with 15% of ice, and it can be slush, 15% or more of ice is considered ice pack. That's not ice pack. That's still 85% ocean. So much is being statistically hidden around the planet to keep the population pacified till the last possible moment. And we are close to that moment. We're close to some links in the chain dropping out, and I don't know or pretend to know exactly when those links will fall out. But if you see a car going 100 miles an hour, and that's the human race at this point, 10 feet from impact into a concrete wall, you can say for certain it's going to hit, and it's going to hit soon. It's going to be ugly, and that's exactly where we're headed. Now, to drive home the point of just how warm our planet is, here's another headline. Doesn't allude to geoengineering, of course, because journalists know that's a taboo subject. Here's the headline. Epic Middle East heat is being compared to weapon of mass destruction. From this report, recent extreme heat events in the Middle East have climate scientists worried about the future climate-related catastrophes. Again, no mention of geoengineering, is there? Because they know not to bring that subject up. Temperatures have climbed above 115 degrees Fahrenheit across the region this summer, and Kuwait and Iraq recently recorded what is likely the hottest temperature ever in the Eastern Hemisphere. That was 129.2 degrees, by the way. Temperatures are going through the roof. The planet is in full-blown meltdown, And climate engineering is completely thwarting the planet's attempt to respond to the meltdown. Hurricanes are being suppressed in the Atlantic basin still. Does anybody even wonder, on a record-warm world with record-warm oceans and hurricanes slaughtering countries around the globe, why there has been no major hurricane impacts in the U.S. for over 10 years? Does anybody wonder about that? How hard is this to figure out? We know there's hurricane suppression elements, patents, programs, and why would we think they're not being used when we have the U.S. military stating on the record that climate change is, quote, the most severe national security threat of all? Look it up. Don't believe me, please. Don't believe anything I say, but please look it up if you care at all for your future or the future of your children. Now, another headline that plugs into the biosphere implosion that I'm trying to outline. Here's the headline. The probability of economic collapse happening this year is increasing. As I've stated many times, the blindingly fast biosphere implosion that is unfolding by the day means that global economic implosion is absolutely certain. And as I stated, now likely very close. I just took a tour of trees through Northern California again. And this is from Lake Shasta to Mount Shasta zone. And our trees here are particularly resilient because it's a very diverse ecosystem, and it's an ecosystem that has been used to heat in the past because of its proximity to the Sacramento Valley. It's a low elevation forest in many cases, and very biodiverse. So from a distance, the trees still look okay. But if you see a person 200 or 300 feet away, maybe they look okay to you, but when you walk up to that person, if you know how a healthy human being should look, you recognize a person is maybe extremely unhealthy. Maybe they're about to fall over at any moment, but you can't tell from a distance. So for people driving up the I-5 freeway, looking around, thinking the trees look healthy, look closer, and you'll see the trees starting to flash out dead along the side of the freeway. And if you know trees at all, if you walk underneath that forest canopy, you see trees dying everywhere. Branches dying, foliage being dropped, trees that are on the verge of flashing out in whole sections dead. And that's the case here. That is the case. In fact, some types of tree species, which I just examined, like a large leaf maple, these trees are, if they're exposed to the sun at all, they're completely cooked, flashed out, dead, stone dead in many cases. Those that are under the canopy have very small, heavily singed leaves. Manzanita looks horribly bad everywhere, with very few exceptions. So the bottom line is, just because you're driving along a freeway and you look out at a forest that might not look too bad from a distance, that is not giving you the true picture. And for those that drive into Yosemite, as I've stated in earlier shows, it's catastrophic and getting worse by the day. Our forests are dying. If our forests die, we die. Our ozone layer is being destroyed. The heat is so incredibly easy to sense and feel for any that are even slightly awake and not willing to go back to sleep because some agency official tells them there's nothing to worry about. Use your sense of reason. The sun feels incredibly intense in your skin because it is, period. The biosphere is imploding. Our oceans are imploding. Atmosphere is being shredded by these programs and other forms of human damage. We must change direction or there'll be nothing left to salvage. Now, what does the power structure do when they feel they're out of options, when they can't hide what's happened to the biosphere, when they know if the public wakes up and finds out that they've been a part of this grand and lethal experiment of climate engineering, and if the public wakes up and finds out their children have been vaccinated with elements that are absolutely harming their children, what will the public do? The power structure knows they're running out of options, so World War III is likely next. Now, on that note, a headline about Obama that people should know and understand. And it's not just Obama, it's both sides of the coin. Doesn't matter whether it's Democrat or Republican. But about Obama specifically, in his presidency, here's a headline. President Obama's lesser-known legacy, arms dealer-in-chief. This was posted on Truth Out by Owen McCormick. Good report, excellent report. Calls for stricter gun control are rather predictable as the regularity of mass shootings has become a new norm within the United States. Laws regulating the purchase of firearms are now a fiercely debated issue and utilized to rally support on both sides of the political spectrum. Society has become mired in political expedient catchphrases such as "our thoughts and prayers are with the victims" or "God isn't fixing this." These catchphrases allow politicians to feel politically active within the debate, yet remain conveniently distant from the heart of it. Ironically, amid all this sanctimonious finger-pointing and critical detail, a critical detail has gone relatively unnoticed. President Obama has discreetly brokered and authorized the sale of more arms to foreign governments than any other president since World War II. How has such a critical detail gone relatively unnoticed by media, seemingly fixated on the United States culture of violence? Now, if Obama has brokered more arms sales to governments around the globe, and we're not talking about benign, benevolent governments, we're talking about countries like Saudi Arabia, countries that behead political dissenters, and this is what our country represents. And when people want to paint what our country's doing as acting as some sort of benevolent force around the globe, how does that plug into this reality? Where does that fit? And for those in our military who are being told they're fighting terrorism or fighting to protect the, quote, homeland, how does such a incredibly crafted propagandistic mindset fit into the reality that our country is arming the very countries and terrorist organizations that we're then fighting? Arming them with one hand and fighting them with the other. How hard is this to see? And Obama, absolutely a part of this. Obama, who claimed he would bring transparency to government and has prosecuted more whistleblowers than all other administrations combined. It's time to wake up. It's absolutely time to wake up. And if we don't wake up soon, quite simply, it's going to be game over. And I know for so many people who are so mesmerized by the material wealth around them. I see so many new cars driving around Northern California and other locations from people who I can't imagine have any idea what's going on around them, or they wouldn't commit themselves to paying on a car for the next 7, 8, 9, 10 years. I don't know how long the car loans go now, because they make everything easier to afford to keep the machine moving forward. I don't know who would commit to that if they really understood that on the current course, based on all available data, that within 10 years, no complex life forms will be able to survive on this planet if we stay on this course. Who would commit to such a long-term obligation if they had any idea that was going on? And we see a lot of quote-unquote environmentalists that are completely immersed in their material possessions as well, while they claim to be fighting for the common good with some little peripheral issue that means nothing in the bigger context, because the hypocrisy we've seen from the environmental institutions and, frankly, the spiritual institutions are shocking. Shocking hypocrisy. I personally delivered flyers for the Reading event to some of the largest churches in Shasta County. Didn't see any presence there from those churches. How is it they claim to adhere to biblical text and the obligations that are required of us from that text and other important traditions as well, and yet ignore truth, verifiable truth that affects the health of our children? How can that be ignored by anyone who claims to be committed to spiritual beliefs, laws, obligations? How does that fit? And for an environmentalist, how does it fit that you claim to care about the environment when, in almost all cases, with Sierra Club, Greenpeace, many other organizations, and many other individuals, by the way, many here in Shasta County, who claim to be completely committed to the common good, completely committed to stopping, quote, global warming, which is real. It's absolutely real, and there are countless causes. But how do you discuss the climate without first and foremost discussing climate engineering? It's total hypocrisy not to address climate engineering first, when that's the greatest single disrupting factor of all, not the only damaging factor. Again, those who think that, you're also missing the mark tremendously. So, as the Earth winds down, as the biosphere implodes, what do we have? A government that people from both sides of the fence are supporting in one way or another. Republicans or Democrats, it doesn't make any difference. That's a total facade. Supporting a government that is expending our last available resources to build the war machine bigger. While our trees are dying around us, insects are dying, oceans are dying, the sun is unimaginably intense because the ozone layer is being torn apart. How does that fit? What are we supporting by engaging in this kind of insanity? And where do we go from here? And that's most important. Where do we go from here? If we stay on this course and the power structure is pushed into a corner by a population that's thankfully finally beginning to wake up because they're being forced to wake up, haven't shown any propensity to want to wake up sooner, for all the reasons I mentioned at the beginning of the show. Denial is prevalent in so many arenas of our society. But where do we go from here? And the power structure is pushing toward World War III. That's their last option. And I want to reiterate, those who feel they are completely dependent on the cancer that's currently controlling the world will continue to obediently support that cancer until the end. And that needs to change. A couple of headlines to drive this point home at where we're headed at blinding speed, because the power structure is out of options as the biosphere implodes and the economy follows. Here's the headline. Breaking. Putin-Minsk negotiations now pointless in light of Crimea provocation. We now have Kiev putting troops on the Crimean border. Kiev that's controlled by the Western power structure. Ukraine was toppled by the Western power structure. How many saw John McCain there in the streets of Kiev fueling the dissent, actually paying dissenters to come to Kiev and help create the chaos? John McCain, same John McCain that was filmed also and photographed with ISIS leaders. Same John McCain that went on Fox News and said he was, quote, intimate with ISIS leaders. And yet our population ignores all this and thinks these problems are all somehow related to what somebody else is doing, not what we're doing. Here's another headline to back up where we're headed. Kiev has turned to terrorism. Putin speaks out on foiled sabotage plot in Crimea. Crimea may be used as a fuse to start World War III because the American public has, for the large part, accepted the lies about what happened in Crimea and why Russia has taken control of that region, which once belonged to Russia to begin with. But that region voted to break away from Kiev. Now, the U.S. always touts a country or a region should have the right to choose their own future, but in this case it didn't apply because it didn't fit the agenda of those in power, well, people like John McCain. And I'm not saying that Russia is a benevolent government or not corrupt. I'm not saying that. All governments are corrupt. But I'm saying who's actually fueling World War III? And it's the Western power structure. From this report, Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko preparing to attack Donbass and Crimea, an extremely dangerous situation. This is the road we're on, and it's important for the American public to stand back and consider that our reality will not be the same much longer. It's a mathematical fact. It's back to the car going 100 miles an hour, and I don't claim to know exactly how the impact will take place or exactly when the links in the chain will start to fall out. But all indications are they'll start to fall out very soon. War is the final hole card of a desperate power structure that has subjected its citizenry to criminal vaccinations, criminal aerosol spraying operations, and countless other atrocities. A quote from Mark Twain to consider deeply. Consider, because the human condition has stayed the same for so long. But now the consequences will be total if this condition persists. From Mark Twain. Man is the only animal that deals in the atrocity of atrocities, war. He's the only one that gathers his brethren about him and goes forth in cold blood and compulse to exterminate his own kind. He's the only animal that for sordid wages, for pay, will march out and help to slaughter strangers of his own species who have done him no harm, with whom he has no quarrel. And in the intervals between campaigns of war, he washes the blood off his hands and claims to work for the universal brotherhood of man. Is that not what we're told? Is that not what's on the military commercials we see? That we're fighting for good, that we are good and they are evil? Wake up. It's up to all of us to wake up, to learn the truth, to face the truth, to remove ourselves from the realm of denial. If we care about our children, if we care about their future, we have an obligation to find out what the truth is and to join the fight for the greater good. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineeringWatch.org.